There is a plant that once fed entire civilizations without fields of grain, without plows, without irrigation canals, and without famine. A single tree that could outproduce corn, wheat, and rice combined, not once but every year, for decades. A food so reliable that island societies built their calendars, their migrations, and their survival around it. And then, almost overnight in historical terms, it vanished from the global food system. Not because it failed, not because it was inefficient, but because it did not fit the world that was being built. This is the story of breadfruit. Welcome to Traditional Harvest. Before we begin, understand this: breadfruit was not a supplement. It was not a curiosity. It was not a side dish. For thousands of years, it was the backbone of food security for millions of people across the tropics. Entire societies thrived without grain silos, without annual planting, without hunger seasons. One planting fed generations. And that alone should make you uncomfortable, because a food system that does not require constant labor, constant inputs, or constant control is dangerous to empires. Breadfruit is a tree, not a crop in the modern sense. Once planted, it takes 3 to 5 years to mature. And then it produces, and produces, and produces. A mature tree can yield between 150 and 300 fruits per year. Some documented trees produce more than 700. Each fruit weighs between 2 and 10 pounds. Do the math. One tree can produce thousands of pounds of food annually, and it does this for 50 to 70 years. Some trees live longer. No replanting, no seed purchases, no annual soil destruction, just food falling from the sky. Long before Europeans arrived in the Pacific, the people of Polynesia had already perfected what modern agriculture still fails to understand: perennial abundance. Breadfruit orchards were carefully managed, not as monocultures, but as living food forests. Trees were propagated clonally, selected for flavor, texture, and seasonality. Different varieties ripened at different times of year, ensuring a continuous food supply. There was no single harvest season. Hunger didn't arrive on a schedule. Breadfruit could be eaten ripe, unripe, roasted, boiled, fermented, dried, or pounded into a paste and stored underground for years. In Tahiti, fermented breadfruit paste, MHI, was a strategic reserve, buried and sealed against cyclones and droughts. It was insurance against catastrophe. When storms destroyed canoes or salt spray killed gardens, the breadfruit still stood. This is critical. Breadfruit didn't just survive disasters, it was designed around them. Nutritionally, it rivaled grains. It was high in complex carbohydrates, rich in fiber, and contained essential minerals like potassium, magnesium, and calcium. Unlike rice or wheat, it required no milling. Unlike corn, it did not strip the soil. Unlike annual crops, it prevented erosion. Its roots stabilized land, its canopy shaded soil. Its fallen leaves fed microorganisms. By calories per acre, traditional breadfruit systems often surpassed wheat and rice combined, without fertilizer, without irrigation, without machines. That kind of efficiency should have made it the foundation of tropical agriculture worldwide. Instead, it became a footnote. The turning point came with European expansion. When explorers reached the Pacific, they were stunned. Sailors wrote about islands where food grew everywhere, where hunger seemed absent, where people worked less than any society they had seen. To colonial minds, this was not paradise, it was a problem. A population that does not need to labor constantly cannot be easily controlled. In the late 18th century, the British Empire saw breadfruit not as food for islanders, but as fuel for slavery. The plan was simple: transport breadfruit trees from Tahiti to the Caribbean to cheaply feed enslaved Africans on sugar plantations. A living ration rooted in the ground, producing endless calories with minimal cost. This task fell to William Bligh, captain of the HMS Bounty. The mission is famous not for its success, but for its failure. The mutiny that erupted aboard the ship in 1789 is often told as a story of discipline and rebellion, but rarely is it framed as what it truly was, a mission to move a food system. The first voyage failed. Bligh was cast adrift. The trees never arrived. But the Empire did not forget. A second expedition succeeded. Breadfruit was introduced to the Caribbean. And something strange happened. It did not become a staple. It did not spread as expected. It did not replace grain imports. Plantation owners preferred imported wheat and salted meat. Enslaved people often rejected breadfruit not because it was inferior, but because it was associated with coercion. A food imposed is not a gift, and so breadfruit entered the global stage already damaged politically, culturally, symbolically. Meanwhile, industrial agriculture was rising. Annual grains fit perfectly into the new model. They required land clearing, they required labor, they required centralized storage, transport, taxation, and trade. Breadfruit required none of that. You couldn't harvest it all at once. You couldn't easily ship it long distances. It ripened when it wanted to. It spoiled quickly unless eaten or processed locally. It fed people where they lived. That was its greatest strength and its greatest crime. By the 19th and 20th centuries, breadfruit was increasingly labeled primitive. Colonial administrations pushed rice and wheat. Local food forests were cleared. Monocultures replaced polycultures. Dependency replaced sovereignty. A tree that could feed a family for generations was replaced by crops that demanded constant obedience. And slowly, quietly, one of the most productive food plants on Earth faded from memory. But the tree did not disappear. It waited. By the time breadfruit slipped out of the global spotlight, something crucial had been lost. Not just a crop, but an entire philosophy of food. Because breadfruit does not behave like wheat, it does not obey planting schedules, it does not fit neatly into rows, it does not ask permission from markets, and that is where the modern world broke its relationship with it. Let's talk about numbers, because this is where the myth collapses. An acre of industrial wheat might produce 3 tons of grain in a good year under ideal conditions with fertilizer, herbicides, machinery, and fuel. Rice, even in flooded paddies, requires enormous labor and water inputs. Corn is a chemical-dependent miracle that collapses without subsidies. Breadfruit orchards, when measured honestly, outperform all of them in calories per acre in tropical regions, and they do it passively. Once established, a breadfruit tree requires almost no maintenance. No plowing, no replanting, no soil disturbance, no seasonal gamble. The tree fruits whether markets rise or fall, whether ships arrive or do not, whether fuel prices spike or collapse. It does not care about supply chains. This is why traditional breadfruit cultures did not experience famine the way grain-based societies did. When drought hit, trees with deep roots still produced. When storms came, trees bent instead of snapping. When pests arrived, diversity diluted their impact. Breadfruit was rarely grown alone. It existed inside ecosystems surrounded by bananas, taro, yams, coconut, nitrogen-fixing trees, and medicinal plants. It was agriculture without fragility. Nutritionally, breadfruit confounds expectations. It is not just starch. It contains meaningful protein, more than rice, comparable to corn, and it contains all essential amino acids when paired with other traditional foods. It is rich in fiber, feeding gut bacteria instead of spiking blood sugar. Its potassium content rivals bananas. Its magnesium content supports nerve and muscle function. For societies without supplements and without fortified foods, this mattered. Preservation matters as well. Breadfruit can be sliced and sun-dried into chips. It can be ground into flour that lasts months. It can be fermented into a sour paste that lasts years underground. Not hypothetically, historically, archaeologically. Entire villages survived off fermented breadfruit reserves through cyclones and lean years. This was food security built into culture, not outsourced to governments or corporations. So why did it disappear? Because industrial systems do not reward resilience. They reward predictability, uniformity, and control. Breadfruit ripens at different times, even on the same tree. Some fruits are ready today, others next week. Machines hate this, global markets hate this, export logistics hate this. You cannot harvest an orchard in one pass and ship it across oceans without loss. Breadfruit bruises easily, it ripens quickly, it refuses to become a commodity, and so it was sidelined. By the mid-20th century, breadfruit was labeled underutilized. That word sounds neutral, but it is not. It is a quiet dismissal. It means cannot be exploited efficiently. Agricultural funding flowed toward grains, soy, and maize. Research into breadfruit nearly stopped. Knowledge was confined to elders' islands and oral tradition. Then climate change arrived. Suddenly, the crops the world depends on began to fail under the very conditions breadfruit evolved to survive. Heat waves, salinity, storms, soil erosion, rising fuel costs, broken supply chains. All the things breadfruit ignores. In the last 2 decades, scientists quietly began studying it again. They found what traditional societies already knew. Breadfruit tolerates drought better than most staples. It grows on marginal soils. It produces high yields with minimal inputs. It sequesters carbon instead of releasing it. Its perennial canopy cools land instead of heating it. One study estimated that replacing a fraction of tropical grain imports with breadfruit could drastically reduce hunger vulnerability across island nations. Another showed breadfruit flour could replace up to 30% of wheat flour in baked goods without gluten and without blood sugar spikes. And still, you almost never see it, because the problem has not changed. Breadfruit does not scale the way corporations want it to. You cannot patent it. You cannot force farmers to buy it every year. You cannot lock it behind fertilizer contracts. Once a community plants it, they are less dependent, less predictable, less profitable. A single breadfruit tree can feed a family. An orchard can feed a village. A landscape can feed itself. That is not an oversight. That is a threat. By the time breadfruit began reappearing in scientific journals, the damage had already been done. Generations had grown up without knowing what it was. Entire regions that once relied on it had been converted to imported rice, wheat flour, and canned food. Dependency replaced memory. Calories arrived by ship instead of by tree. And with that shift came vulnerability. Here's the part that is hardest to accept. Breadfruit did not disappear because it was inefficient. It disappeared because it made people independent. Modern food systems are not designed to maximize nourishment. They are designed to maximize throughput, control, and profit. Annual crops are perfect for this. They demand land clearing every year. They demand fuel. They demand chemicals. They demand seed purchases. They demand centralized storage and distribution. Every step creates a transaction. Every transaction creates leverage. Breadfruit short-circuits that entire structure. You plant it once, you harvest for decades. You save nothing for seed because the tree keeps producing. There is no annual reset, no seasonal desperation, no leverage point where hunger forces compliance. This is why breadfruit was quietly sidelined rather than loudly banned. You do not need to outlaw a plant if you can simply stop teaching people how to use it. You redirect funding. You change school curricula. You redefine progress. You label tree-based food systems as backward and call imported flour modern. And people forget, but forgetting does not mean erasing. Across the Pacific, breadfruit trees never stopped producing. In backyards, village commons, church lands, and abandoned plots, they continued doing what they had always done, feeding people quietly. No marketing, no packaging, no brand. Then global systems began to fracture. Supply chains snapped during crises, fuel prices surged, shipping delays turned into food shortages. Island nations that relied heavily on imports suddenly found themselves exposed, and once again attention turned not forward but backward. Researchers began working with elders, not textbooks, elders. They cataloged hundreds of breadfruit varieties, some bred for drought, some for salty air, some for soft texture, some for long storage. This was not accidental biodiversity. It was deliberate human selection across thousands of years. A living library embedded in landscapes, and it revealed something modern agriculture still refuses to admit. Resilience does not come from uniformity. It comes from diversity and time. Breadfruit trees do not all fail at once. They do not respond identically to stress. One variety might fruit heavily in a dry year, another after storms, another in cooler seasons. Together, they smooth out risk. Grain monocultures amplify it. When hurricanes hit the Caribbean, fields of annual crops are erased in hours. Breadfruit trees lose fruit, but they remain standing. When drought scorches fields, deep-rooted trees still access moisture. When economies collapse, trees do not notice. This is not nostalgia. This is systems thinking. Today, breadfruit is being reintroduced under new language. Climate-smart agriculture, agroforestry, food sovereignty, carbon sequestration. All modern terms for ancient practices. The irony is sharp. The solution was never lost. It was ignored. But here is the final truth that matters most. Breadfruit does not need saving. People do. The tree will survive climate change. It already has. It survived colonialism, forced crop replacement, global neglect, and economic marginalization. It is still here. The question is whether human societies will remember how to organize themselves around abundance instead of scarcity. Because once you plant breadfruit, something changes psychologically. Food stops being fragile. Hunger stops being seasonal. Time stretches. You stop thinking in months and start thinking in decades. That mindset does not benefit systems built on urgency and fear. And that is why breadfruit still makes powerful institutions uncomfortable. It proves that feeding people does not require endless extraction. It proves that resilience can be passive. It proves that abundance can be permanent. A single tree outperforming corn, wheat, and rice combined is not just a biological fact. It is a philosophical challenge. We did not lose breadfruit because it failed. We lost it because it worked too well. And now, as the systems that replaced it begin to crack, the tree is still standing, waiting for people to remember that food was never meant to be this complicated. If this story belongs anywhere, it belongs in the ground, planted, remembered, and passed forward. This is traditional harvest.